Okay, here's a typical repair you'll find on a electric bike. Repair the flat rear wheel. This is a 2012 Ecomopeds model. It's very similar to the 2013, and it has the standard flip-down rails, some kind of footbed cover. Those have got to come off. In order to change the flat tire, you have to do a couple things. Separate the motor controller wire from the harness. Remove this foot peg. You can leave it on the stand, lock it. It would be a good idea to put some blocks underneath it to support it. You got to disconnect the brake hardware. You're going to disconnect the brake hardware, unloosen the torque arm bolt, and then do the 7/8 nuts on each side. Remember the order of the fasteners, and then you got to loosen the chain tensioner. A couple turns on each side, make it equal so it slacks the chain so you can get it off the sprocket. To get the motor controller wires off, you have to take off this access cover. And there's a plate and an access panel underneath it, very similar to the GC models too. It's just two screws right here, and then you can just take off the rubber mat, and there's an access compartment that comes out. Once you get out the wires, I would suggest using a feed wire to feed it through. That way when you're done, you can pull back out. Sometimes you end up taking the whole entire rear plastic off, and that requires the top fender screws. This cover slides out. There's two screws there. There's one bottom screw down there, and that allows you to take the entire plastic off. One thing we noticed on the 2012s is that the plastic tended to flap and rattle, so I'm going to do the modification of putting a zip tie there and one, of course, on the other side so it doesn't rattle as much. These have got the rubber bumpers to keep these from slapping up against a frame and making all sorts of metal noises. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to get some tools and start checking the rest of the bike. First, I made sure that the wheel was actually true, and for the most part it is. It was a pinch flat. Here's the problem with the rear tire. If you don't run over debris, if you don't keep the tire inflated to its recommended 32 or 40 psi, it's marked on the side of the tire. When you're sitting on the bike weighs 150 or 200 pounds depending on the model you got, plus the rider weight. It's almost 300 or 400 pounds. When it goes to rotate the first rotation of the wheel, that's an awful lot of torque, and the computer's going, well, and the wheel's not moving, I'm going to increase the current. Okay, so eventually it generates enough torque to get the wheel first turning, and then it backs down. But then when you don't have the wheel, don't have the tire properly inflated, you can literally rotate the tire on the rim, which of course pinches the tube and shears it, and maybe even take the valve stem out in the process. So you got to keep your front and rear tires properly inflated. Obviously you can go a little slack on the front for some cushioning and comfy ride and not ride on a knife edge, but on the rear tire it's an absolute. You keep it at its maximum, give or take a pound. Anyway, I'm going to grab some tools and I'm going to start taking it apart.